Hello and welcome. We are About Face Veterans. Welcome to our first edition of Vets React. We're going to be reacting to the 7th January 6th hearing that was held last week. The reason that we thought this was interesting was that, one, over 81 veterans, according to an ABC report, were arrested in the January 6th riots incident. And of course, as veterans, we find this to be very interesting and concerning. And why this hearing specifically, they're going to be talking about and interviewing Oath Keepers. And what, for those of you who don't know, the Oath Keepers, the reason they're called the Oath Keepers is this group is specifically formed for former police and military members with the intention that they will be keeping the oath that they made to the Constitution after they've left these lines of work. And I think in some instances we'll even see that if you were to research it, there's actually active police officers and military members in the Oath Keepers. So we're going to be watching that today and giving some of our feedback and reaction, our honest reactions as veterans to what roles veterans have played in these extremist groups and in these riots in January 6th. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. My name is Ollie. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a military veteran. I was in the Army from 2002 to 2006. The older I get, the harder it is to remember what those dates were. They used to just pop off my tongue, and I'm like, it was a long time ago. And I've been a member of About Face for about 3 years now, and I'm currently a campaign coordinator on staff here. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Shiloh.
Thank you, Ollie. Hey, everyone, I'm Shiloh. I use they, them pronouns. And yeah, I was in the Marines from 2005 to 2012. And yeah, glad to be here, member of About Face and the member coordinator with About Face. And I'll pass to Chris.
Hi. Hi. I'm Chris Velasquez. I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. Served from 2004 to 2010 with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I use they pronouns, and I'm an About Face member, and as well as a veteran for peace and the digital organizer on staff with Veterans for Peace National. I'm really happy to be here and discussing this with my friends here and fellow comrades. I'll toss it over to Zach.
Hey everyone, I'm Zach. I was in the Army from 2010 until 2018. I have been a member of About Face since 2018, I think, as well, and in a couple of other veteran spaces, some leftist organizing spaces. This topic is of particular interest to me because with a group of other people, like pretty regularly, like track the far right and what they're doing. And to anybody who is doing this around January 6th of 2021, this is not like a surprise that came out of nowhere. It was actually really obvious. Anyway, we'll get into that later. Anyway, I go by Zach, use he, him pronouns, and I'm really excited to jump into it.
Thanks, everybody. So we can go ahead and get the video started. We might take some pauses if we want to have a deeper conversation, but we'll be giving our reactions. So without my least favorite phrase, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be starting after their first recess. For you viewers at home who may be wondering where the first hour and a half of boring shit went, we cut it out to be nice to you so that we could just talk about the important shit. Just a sec, folks. We're loading up the video. Just just bask in our beautiful faces for a second. Look at them. Vogue a little bit.
Beautiful faces. Did anybody have any expectations out of this before? I think before the video starts, like, did anybody have any expectations, or what did we think we were going to see before we start talking about it or get into the video?
It's a little bit of a loaded question because I already watched it, but I initially expected them to get more in depth into who and what the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers is. And to be talking about how there's a bunch of veterans in these groups.
I'd say for me, I watched the first I watched 3 or 4 of these hearings before, so I expected the same bullshit, just kind of surface level. This is what happened, as if we all didn't see it, but not really diving into much. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of these. Most of these kind of proceedings tend to be boring, but I remember this one. This one had a lot of bangers in it. Like there's some good like testimony and obvious turncoating, and oh my god, these people are giant pieces of garbage. Kind of shockingly, actually, which is gonna lead to another point, which I'm gonna bring up, which is like, okay, if you're a congressional hearing and you bring up all of these issues and you sort of lay out a case for prosecution, what's going to happen when you don't do anything? Okay, you're like, Trump's bad. Donate to the DNC. what's the end goal here?
I think like not. I'm trying to remember what I was expecting going into it, not like what I took away from it and like the disappointments I had in it. But like, I agree. I'll with Ali. I definitely think I expected to hear a public testimony about the role of extremism in politics, right? Like the pervasive nature of these groups, and then getting into kind of like discussion about some like the issues of these things. And well, I guess we're going to see how that played out and if any of our expectations were met in a few minutes. So, but that's what I was expecting. Right. I didn't know if I expected anything to come out of it, like as a result on the backside of it. But
I definitely didn't expect them to take an hour and a half to even bring up what we had all come to watch, which is what ends up happening is they don't even bring this up. They don't even start talking about these groups until after the first recess, excuse me. All right. Let's go ahead and get into it. I'm not hearing sound.
I'm pretty sure it just sounds like the Peanuts teacher when he talks.
All right, so it looks like we're going to need to work with that a little bit. I mean, back to the conversation about expectations. I don't think I expected honesty out of these folks, but it was still really just kind of disturbing, like the casual way that they handled some of these topics and just like glossed over them. Like I don't want to spoil too much, but it was a mix of like, yeah, I guess I should have expected that, and disappointment when I watched it the first time.
On that, I think for me, a lot of it, Ollie, as I'm watching this, and anytime I'm hearing politicians, it's just you got to kind of leave expectations at the door, and just that recognition that they're not actually working for us, for the people. They're working for themselves. They're working for their pocketbooks. They're not actually gonna, do anything that betters our lives. So.
Was anybody surprised? Go ahead, Chris.
I was taking a look at some of the comments coming in between the YouTube and the Facebook where we're broadcasting. So there's an individual asking about Antifa and BLM in there, but also I think one of the standout comments here is that if we ever attempt a coup, we will make sure that we take lots of pictures and post them to social media during the process. We will make sure that we are very public about our involvement in attempting a coup based off of racist and white supremacist talking points that have whipped us up into a frenzy. Like I think Cloud at Mine, who is Gamers for Peace, I got to point at Gamers for Peace for a moment, doing truth in recruitment and for both military recruitment and extremism recruiting. So we talk about a lot of these things a lot. And so that's a good, nice little point of sarcasm there about the intentions and what the group of people that were going in and doing this across it all were their frame of mind, right? Like, and what the gravity of the situation to them seemed to be more about the social media gains in a lot of ways without an actual intent for understanding how politics or like creating a governing system or doing anything involving the betterment of our society. It was all fueled largely by social media influence and an emotional thing going on. So.
Was somebody asking about whether, like Antifa was secretly responsible for this? Is that what the...
Well, yeah, I mean, this is all like all the responses to this are like crowdsourced to the the QAnon hive mind. Like a lot of the right-wing strategists, like they're just kind of hoping that the details will sort of be filled in a little bit by people. And a lot of other places, shockingly, they weren't waiting for that. They were like had a very specific plan and people in contact. I'm just gonna respond to people in the comments because I like to do that. First of all, someone said that most of the testimony is hearsay. A lot of it is hearsay, but not all of it is hearsay, and they usually denote when and where it isn't. Also, this isn't a court of law, so hearsay is fine because there's no jury. Second, like the whole like, well, if the coup is so bad, why don't you like condemn Antifa and BLM? And well, because that's a total canard, right? Talking about like a more populist working class uprising over a specific issue and to address things systemically with demands, which is what BLM has had the entire time since 2014. That's a lot different than if you are the people in power and you're going to lose power. And so you talk about purging people who don't agree with you, and you talk about throwing out the results of election, and you talk about, wiping your ass with the fucking Constitution. That's a lot different. It's a lot different when you have state power behind the things that you're doing. And it's a lot different when you're just trying to like run a smoke screen. So like the coup attempt, because I mean, a lot of people have pointed out, and they're right. So what happens if the like January 6th protesters like hold Congress? They occupy Congress. What's going to happen? And the answer is not a whole lot. But that's not the point. It's not like they're going to occupy Congress and be like, we're in charge now, and everyone's going to go like, oh God, I guess they won. Like that's not how it's supposed to work. It's there to represent like a mass uprising and give the appearance that like people all over the country are doing this. And also to pressure politicians like Pence, because a lot of GOP politicians are spineless, and if they think that they're going to get killed by a mob or just voted out of office, like they're probably going to go along with any sort of like they stole the vote thing, right? It gives a little bit more oomph, and so that's the difference. There's about 1 billion differences. I mean, also I like to put a moral valence on most of these things. And the other difference is like there's there are material reasons for BLM and Antifa to show up, and there were literally no material reasons for like the election, that they stole the election people, right? There's no like no like legitimate video of people stealing election. There's no data. Everyone who's looked into it, they spent like millions of dollars trying to expose evidence. There's nothing there. This isn't the situation when like, you know, 8 people have a camera of like a police officer killing someone who's unarmed, right? That's different. We have like, there's material evidence. Anyway, I rest my case. My closing argument is you're wrong. Eat shit.
I actually did hear that Antifa did orchestrate this from their secret base in the Hollow Earth, which is also flat, and the moon landing is fake. However, I also hear that there is a very, you know, large beta, you'll describe it. Like, we can show you who the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys are, and we can clearly show that these are not groups related to Antifa. And in fact, these groups often form around opposing them. And if you were saying that they are both the same group and this is some kind of conspiracy, I invite you to look at our politics and take that conspiracy there, because that's where that's actually happening. That's where we're being led to believe there are two sides and there are not. That there is a difference between the people that participated in this insurrection attempt and what other people might describe as violence that happened in the streets over a particular period. I am not here to characterize people's actions as violent or not violent. I don't believe in separating violent protesters from nonviolent protesters, because that just puts more people in harm, and it gives the state more excuses to do harm to folks when you categorize folks like that. So to me, like, this is less about trying to show a difference between the actions of like BLM. I don't even like to say BLM, because we're talking about a large group of people who are not necessarily organized into any sort of group that have taken part in some of these things. But I'm not here to characterize their actions against each other. I'm here to talk about how vets have been radicalized into these extremist groups known as the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, and how they participated in what we saw there. Thanks for your comment, though, whoever you are. It looks like we're still working on sharing the screen. Do we have any update on that? The other option is like, we could just talk about some of this stuff without the video if we can't get that to work, because I do have some notes here.
I'd say go for that. I'm going to try to do some of the video over here real quick.
Okay. So one of the key moments in this first chunk we're going to watch is they show a video. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm also reading the chat as we're troubleshooting this video issue. So go ahead and give that a shot if you can. Stuart Rhodes, for those of you who don't know, is the leader of the Oath Keepers and former military member. I believe they left the Army as a specialist. They wear an eye patch, as you may have seen, in a cowboy hat, and they are going to share a video of Stuart Rhodes giving a speech on January 6th, or it might have been the day before. And he ends the speech with hua, which to a rousing cheer from the audience. For those of you who do not know, hua is the battle cry of the Army, HOOAH, and it's one of the most obvious examples of how militarism is infecting these spaces, and is one of the key factors that, you know, led to the formation of these groups. White supremacy, militarism are the basis of these groups, and I think it's important to show that connection. For those of you that watched this previously, how did that make you feel to hear that guy say that obvious like military term, and to hear how the crowd reacted to that?
Anybody hear that when I play it?
No.
No?
Oh, wait, it's just starting. There wouldn't be sound here? Okay.
Do you hear? No?
No.
Okay.
The gremlins are real today.
Let's see if we can do...
Watch veterans troubleshoot live.
Yeah.
I think I could try to answer your question, Ollie. Like,
Thanks, Shiloh.
yeah, sure. What did that bring up for me is just this I mean, it was a visceral response of like a shuddering, just on a personal level, to hear that, as you called it, the battle cry of the army, and then another response of just like frustration that that point didn't get and never gets brought up, that the oath keepers, like you were explaining, like the definition of like why are they called the oath keepers, like I feel like that's left out of the conversation on purpose, and because the folks don't want to admit that the military ripens extremism, and that the U.S. military is an extremist organization that just, you know, when folks get out of the military and they have that mindset, they're going to go somewhere.
Close associate.
Hey,
The founder and president.
For future reference, it's not at all clear how to do
Who
this.
has been charged
You have to
with
share the
seditious
Chrome tab, not the
conspiracy in
window.
relation.
It doesn't give you the
Capitol
audio option
attack.
unless you share the Chrome tab, which is
Van
really
Dayton
obnoxious.
Hove broke
Thank
with
you,
the
Zach.
Oath Keepers.
all right, with
and
much
has
Everyone
since
out there
spoken
who
out
can-
forcefully.
sorry.
with much
against the
further
violent
ado,
group.
we're going to go ahead
Mr.
and watch
Ayers
this
is a
video.
former supporter of President Trump. He answered the president's call to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. He marched to the Capitol on the president's orders. He pleaded guilty last month to disorderly and disruptive conduct at the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, who no longer supports President Trump, came forward voluntarily to share his story as a warning. I will now swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you
Also, if
swear
you guys
or affirm
have
under
specific
penalty
points,
of
I
perjury
do have the
that the
technology
testimony you're
available to
about
me
to give
to
is
fast
the truth,
forward.
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
All right, this
You may
is-
be seated.
I spent a few years with the Oath Keepers, and I can tell you that they may not like to call themselves a militia, but they are. They're a violent militia.
Do they not like to call
And-
themselves a militia?
They are largely Stewart Rhodes.
They're the most militia-y non-militia if they don't.
And I think rather than try to use words, I think the best illustration for what the Oath Keepers are happened January 6th, when we saw that stacked military formation going up the stairs of our Capitol. I saw radicalization that started with my beginning of my time with them and continued over a period of time as
I
the
highly
member
doubt that's
base
when this
and who it
radicalization started.
was that Stewart Rhodes was courting drifted further and further right into the alt-right world.
And for anyone
into,
that may be confused,
white
this
nationalists,
person
and even
looks
straight
like
up
Stewart
racists.
Rhodes. They are not. They have
And
two eyeballs. They are
it
not
came
wearing
to a
hats.
point where I could no longer continue to work for them. But the Oath Keepers are a dangerous militia that is in large part fed by the ego and drive of Stewart Rhodes, who at times seemed to see himself as this paramilitary leader. I think that drove a lot of it. So
One thing I didn't
in
like
my
about a lot of
opinion, the Oath
this
Keepers
is
are a
that
very dangerous
they
organization.
do traffic in
Thank
a
you
lot
very
of
much. You talked a little
like,
bit
oh,
about
these-
that danger.
he's
So,
getting rid of this. But
What is
like,
the Oath Keepers' vision for America?
they're just a bunch of like posers
why
going
should
around
Americans
trying
be
to like look like
concerned
they're
about
tough,
it?
and it's like that's not true. Actually, they have a lot of weapons and they train regularly.
I think we
they're
saw a
actually like
glimpse of
they are a militia.
what
They are
the
not just like
vision
random
of the
people
Oath Keepers
cosplaying.
is on January 6th.
It's
It doesn't necessarily include the rule of
there's
law.
a bunch of
Doesn't
like
necessarily
misrepresentations
include,
that
um,
occur throughout
it
this
includes
entire thing
violence.
with his testimony.
includes
And like
trying
I'll
to
when
push
we
their
like
way
pause and
through
take a
lies,
longer
through deceit,
moment, I'll get into
through
some of that.
intimidation,
But
and through
I want to
the
call
perpetration
bullshit
of violence.
on him
Playing
and his
of
representation
people
of
who
his
may
role
not know
in Oath
better
Keepers.
through
I'm just going
lies
to call
and rhetoric
bullshit.
and propaganda.
And I'll
Get swept
give
up
the
in
reasons
these
why
moments.
in a little bit.
And I'll admit I was swept up at one point as well too. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, it does.
He's
And
ironically
you talk
chosen to
about
wear
being
the
swept
Descendants
up.
shirt today.
So at
to
what
smash the
point
most punk
did
rock.
you break with the Oath Keepers?
There came a point, there were many red flags, and I probably should have broke with them much earlier than I did.
Don't you think?
But the straw that broke the camel's back really came when I walked into a grocery store. We were living up in the very remote town of Eureka, Montana, and there was a group of core members of the group of the Oath Keepers and some associates, and they were having a conversation at that public area where they were talking about how the Holocaust was not real. And that was, for me, something I just could not abide. And, you know, we were not wealthy people at all. We were barely surviving, and it didn't matter. I went home to my wife, my kids, and I told them that I've got to walk away at this point.
Yeah, you walked
don't know how
away
we're
the
gonna
moment
survive
that
or
the
where we're gonna
bad thing
go,
that the
what we're gonna
TV told
do,
you is super
but
bad.
I just can no longer.
Like they did
continue
that. All the other bad
and
things
put
up
in
to
my
that point.
resignation.
No, but the moment they became Indiana
Thank you very
Jones bad
much.
guys, you were like, nah, I can't do
Mr.
that.
Harris,
Can you
there
pause
was
for a
many
second?
people in the
Like, I
crowd
feel like
that-
it's a good pause point for a moment, right? Here's why I call bullshit, right? Holocaust denialism and anti-Semitism is a core like principle of a lot of the radicalization into extremism, right? There's a lot of rhetoric up before that conversation in a public space that has been had that all coincides and comes up to that denialism point. In order, like, to be in this, to like get into these areas, you have to wade through like so much content, digital content, and on various platforms. And those platforms are places that really like uphold this like free speech absolutist drapery. Like they veil themselves in this free speech absolutism, and in order for them to demonstrate that they are free speech absolutists, that they're holding this, that they're not censoring or anything, people go out of their way to say these talking points because that's why they're not on mainstream platforms talking about this. This is the content that these groups are going to Telegram, Signal, and 4chan, 8chan, and all these other platforms to discuss. So like, this rhetoric has been around in the Oath Keepers for a long time. This rhetoric is also part of the Proud Boys rhetoric. This rhetoric is coming out of the intellectual dark web with Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro, right? All of this rhetoric is in our mainstream and is casually talked about by the demographic of people that are getting swept up into these accelerationist and militia groups, right? You're also supporting Trump and Trump's presidency, and the grounds at which you're mobilizing your militia on are in order to push back on great replacement talking points, and like I'm sure that they're sending some good people, but Mexicans are rapists and murderers coming across the border rhetoric from Trump, right? That's the stuff that mobilized people into Oath Keepers, 3%ers, Proud Boys groups, right? So you already went into here knowing that's a talking point, and and you're a spokesperson for this group, so you know the rhetoric that is used in these chat rooms before you filter it down to something that is palatable by the public. And now you're saying, "Oh, I was in public once, and like." At this point, I just couldn't take it anymore. You went into this space because that's what they were talking about, right? Like, and it's always been that way, and that's the history of these groups in large ways. And I hate how, and this, I'm going to bring this up a bunch of times throughout this entire viewing, is that we are allowing this person, this platform, to rehabilitate their self-image and their public image, right? This is being a spokesperson for the Oath Keepers. You've probably done some sort of media training, or you've researched some media aspects and communications tools and things. So like, you very well know and are coached in in using this forum to represent in the most palatable of ways what is going on with these softest gloves. So like this isn't an accurate representation of this person's involvement or their intentions in being involved with this group.
Yeah, I really fully agree with that. I mean, even just them saying they don't like to call themselves a militia is kind of reflective of how this has been an ongoing issue, because they're trying to separate themselves from the rest of the militia movement that it's ongoing, but they were calling them militias, back in the 90s when we had the Michigan militia and that sort of thing. And this person getting into this combo about Holocaust denial and then all of a sudden being, turned off, I think is also reflective of how white supremacy and these nationalist groups evolve their language to make it more tolerable to folks, just like you're saying, Chris. And that was they just peeled it back, and he saw for the first time what they were really saying, because he wasn't critically thinking. And like a really good example of it is how the Proud Boys use this term, Western chauvinism. We skipped over a clip of Roger Stone taking like the Western chauvinism oath. And what they're saying is that we're not apologizing for creating the Western world. We're Western chauvinists. We believe in Western society. So that's just a rebranding of racism, right? They're saying we're not apologizing for creating the United States of America. How was the United States of America created? Through colonialism, slavery, genocide, right? So they're saying we don't want to apologize for those things, and we like them. But they found a way to repackage it to get you to say it in the media, right? So, like, I think, yeah, absolutely, Chris.
January 6th, including you, who are not part of an extremist group, I'd like to start by having you tell the American people a little bit about yourself. Can you tell us about your life before January 6th?
Yeah, basically nothing but a family man and a working man. Worked at the company, a cabinet company up in Northeast Ohio for going on 20 years. Family's my life. I was a supervisor there, so that took up a lot of my a lot of my free time. Other than that, with my family, camping, playing basketball, playing games with my son.
Just what any ordinary American citizen, family man would do.
Yep, exactly.
So this committee has reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from January 6th. During this review, we identified you entering the Capitol as we see in this video. Mr. Ayers, why did you decide to come to Washington on January 6th?
Damn, that camo's not working.
For me personally, I was, pretty hardcore into the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I followed, President Trump, on all of the websites, he basically put out, come to Stop the Steal rally, and I felt like I needed to be down here.
So you basically learned about the rally on social media and at some point made a decision.
Could also write an
Washington.
Entire article about how
I had some friends I found out
people
were
have
coming down. I just
about
stopped,
how the ecosystem of
hopped
social
on
media has
them right
drawn
at the
this,
tail end when I
and
found
how
out.
it's this gigantic
Came down here.
churning
Thank you very
whirlpool
much.
that
The
like
chair
sucks people in and
recognizes the
changes
vice
them. Like you
chair,
have
Ms. Cheney,
brands that are like,
Wyoming.
oh, we're
Any
just going to make
questions
this
she
stuff
may
so we can
have.
sell,
Thank you very much,
stop
Mr.
the
Chairman.
steal things. And it's like,
Mr.
yeah, but then
Ayers,
those
when
people
you
kind of
entered the
become
Capitol,
that.
last year,
Like
did you
it's
believe
like
that
every
the election had
conspiracy
been
theory will start
stolen?
like picking up pieces along the
At
way.
that time, yeah.
And that's why the
everything
grifter
that
industrial
was seen
complex is like
online,
really amplified a lot
I
of this stuff.
definitely
Because like,
believe
look at all the
that's
merch they
exactly
sell.
what-
Like,
that
look at
was
the
the
Stop the
case.
Steal stuff and the January 6th.
And when,
Everybody's buying merch.
You heard from President Trump that the election was stolen. How did that make you feel?
Oh, I was very upset, as were most of his supporters.
I'd be upset about that tie, dude.
That's basically what got me to come down here.
And do you still believe
And
the
the
election
haircut,
was
let's be real.
stolen?
I was.
Do we really have to create a situation?
I got away from all the social media.
I really wish we didn't create a situation in
January
which
6th
Liz
happened.
Cheney looks like a reasonable person.
Basically deleted it all.
She's not.
It's ridiculous.
It pisses
Yeah.
me off.
I was just reading the chat.
Something like that to
I was
be
just
that-
a normal person, but showed
actually
up
for that to
January
actually
6th
take
with
place
gear
and
and
it's too
camo.
big, you know,
I wasn't
there'd be-
radical before
There's
that.
no way you can
That
keep
stood
something
out
like
to me
that
too.
quiet.
He showed up in full
big
like
as
battle
something like
rattle,
that,
ready to go.
you
He
know,
was just an ordinary
With
guy.
all the all the lawsuits being shot down.
At no point in my days with the militia down on the field
and,
running
I
tactical
think
training
that's very
drills
important.
on how to do assassinations in
and we've
traffic
also talked about
and live
today
fire
in
drills
previous hearings,
and
the
planning
extent to which
overrunning
the president himself
Capitol
was
Hill.
told that the election had
Did
been
I
stolen.
think that this
by
was
his Justice
radical
Department,
or
by his
extreme
White House
in my
counsel, by his
racist
campaign?
beliefs when
Would it have made a
every
difference
word
to
out of our
you
mouth
to know that
was
President
rooted
Trump
in
himself
racist
had no
propaganda?
evidence?
I had
Why
no
was
idea that I was a radical
Oh,
at all.
definitely. You know, who knows? I may not have come down here then. You know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Chair recognizes.
Because we have limited
Gentlewoman
time,
from
what do
Florida, Ms.
do
Murphy.
people have some other parts that we want to see? This is like, I
Earlier
have the
today,
bigger
we
video.
showed
We
how
can go
Donald Trump's
to
December 19th tweet
places that have
summoned
been
both
blocked if
extremist groups
necessary.
as well
I
as
mean, have been
rank and
marked
file
off as
supporters
stuff
of
we want to talk about.
President Trump
We
to
were
come to
planning on
Washington,
watching
D.C.
this through when we
average
were
Americans.
starting
He
on
told
time
them
from here.
to, quote, be there, we'll be wild,
The
and they came.
the Oath Keeper
He showed how Mr.
is
President
going to
Here we
talk
go.
about. I wish I knew his name. No, I don't. The Oath Keeper is going to talk about the military training they do at some point in his testimony. So that would be good to catch. And then this person, the captions are covering up their name, but they have just a banger of something to say about Vietnam at the end. that
how
we should
President Trump
watch.
repeatedly told
Oh, let's hear
them,
him.
fight, 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 and they marched to the Capitol. Mr. Ayers, you were in that crowd at the rally, and then the crowd that marched to the Capitol. When you arrived on the ellipse that morning, were you planning on going to the Capitol?
No, we didn't actually plan to go down there.
Got
Um,
got a
we
family
went
issue. I got to
basically
attend
see
to. I'll
the
be right
Stop the
back.
Steal rally, and that was
Stop my
it.
camera.
So why'd you decide to march to the Capitol?
No, right.
course,
as the
commercial.
Yeah, man.
There we go.
We do not
Thank
have the
you.
premium version
Well,
here.
basically, the president, got everybody riled up, told everybody to head on down. So we basically were just following what he said.
After the president's speech, as you're marching down to the Capitol, how did you feel?
This was another thing I found
I would,
disappointing was how
I'm
hard
angry,
they just
you know,
wanting to
after
connect to Trump and not
everything-
talk about the culture that led to these groups and that how these groups have been existing since before Trump was even born.
Committee will be in order. The chair
I was
recognizes
just about to
Gentlewoman
make a
from
comment
Maryland,
about that also.
Chairman, President
uh,
Trump's tweet drew tens of thousands of Americans to Washington to form the angry crowd that would be transformed on January the 6th into a
So many
violent
thoughts.
mob. Dr. Donnell Harvin, who was the chief of Homeland Security and Intelligence for DC, told the committee how his team saw Trump's December 19th tweet unite violent groups across the spectrum on the far right.
We got derogatory information from OSINT suggesting that some very, very violent individuals were organizing to come to DC. And not only were they organizing to come to DC, but they were these groups, these non-aligned groups were aligning. And so all the red flags went up at that point. When you have armed militia.
What's their definition of non-alignment? though?
Collaborating with white
Maybe they don't
supremacy
hang out
groups,
together, but is there not
collaborating
alignment
with,
between the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the Three
conspiracy
Percenters and all
theory
these
groups
groups? Just
online,
in
all
nature?
for the common goal. You start seeing.
Well, I think
what
that's
we
kind of
call
the point, right?
terrorism, a
It's
blended
like to
ideology,
make
and
this
that's a
all
very,
seem
very
like
bad sign.
individual,
When there were
individual
clearly
groups,
across,
and we can individually
not just
blame
across
Trump
one
for all
platform,
of
but
this
across multiple
when it's
platforms,
a
these groups
cultural, it's a system
coordinating, not
beliefs
just like
that they
chatting,
all
hey, how's it
believe in.
going? What's the weather
But
like
if
where
we
you're
can
at?
like
But
divide them
what
up,
are you
it makes this
bringing? What are
seem
you
smaller
wearing?
and like it's not as big
where
of a
do we
deal,
meet up?
where we
Do
can
you
put
have
all the
plans for
blame on one
Capitol?
person,
That's
then get rid of that one
operational.
person,
That's
and now
like
the problem's gone.
pre-operational
When in
intelligence,
reality,
right?
we all know that's not
And
true.
that is something that's clearly alarming.
The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers are two key groups that responded immediately to President Trump's call. The Proud Boys are a far-right street-fighting group that glorifies violence and white supremacy. The Oath Keepers are extremists who promote a wide range of conspiracy theories and sought to act as a private paramilitary force for Donald Trump. The Department of Justice has charged leaders of both groups with seditious conspiracy to overthrow
Once
the
again,
government of the United
ignoring
States
what
on
the Oath
January the
Keepers
6th.
formed to do.
Trump's December 19th tweet motivated these two extremist
Yeah,
groups,
even his
which have historically not worked
description
together
as street
to
fighters.
coordinate their
I don't know what that
activities.
means. And also, like,
December
they're
19th at
self-proclaimed
10:22 a.m.,
militia.
just
It's
hours
very
after
different.
President Trump's tweet, Kelly Meggs, the head of the Florida
the
Oath
Proud
Keepers,
Boys,
declared an
like, they
alliance
did start
among
off
the
as
Oath
street
Keepers,
fighters.
the
Like
Proud
they
Boys, and the
they
Florida
like kind of
Three
started off
Percenters,
as a
another
response
militia
to
group. He wrote, "We have decided to work together
2014
and
to
shut this
2015.
shit down."
Can't remember when they were founded, but
Phone
they're
records
definitely like a
obtained by the
reaction
Select Committee showed that later that
to
afternoon, Mr.
mass
Meggs
street
called
protests, and they're like,
Proud
we're just
Boys
going to show
leader
up and beat the shit out of
Enrique
people.
Tarrio.
I know because
They
I know
spoke
people got
for
beat up by
several
them when
minutes.
everyone was like,
The very next
who are
day,
the Proud
Proud
Boys?
Boys got to work. The Proud Boys launched an encrypted chat called the Ministry of Self-Defense. The committee obtained hundreds of these messages, which show
Does anybody
strategic
know
and
what they
tactical
were
planning
using for their
about
encrypted
January
chat?
the 6th, including
A lot of different stuff.
maps
They're
of
using
Washington, D.C. that
Signal,
pinpoint the
Telegram.
location
They
of
use Telegram to
police.
push out big stuff.
In the weeks
Signal.
leading up to the attack, leaders in both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers worked
I mean, they've been
with
hopping
Trump
around social
allies.
media stuff.
One
like
such
Gab
ally was
and,
Lieutenant General Michael Flynn,
Christie seemed like he had
Trump's
a
former national security advisor and
more
one of the
specific answer.
participants in the unhinged meeting at the White House on December 18th. He also had connections to the Oath Keepers. This photo from December 12th shows Flynn and Patrick Byrne, another Trump ally who was present at that December 18th meeting, guarded by indicted Oath Keeper Roberto Minuta. Another view of the scene shows Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes in the picture as well. Another central figure with ties to this network of extremist groups was Roger Stone, a political consultant and longtime confidant of President Trump. He pardoned both Flynn and Stone in the weeks between the election on November 3rd and January 6th. In the same time frame, Stone communicated with both the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers regularly. The committee obtained encrypted content from a group chat called Friends of Stone, FOS, which included Stone, Rhodes, Tarrio, and Ali Alexander. The chat focused on various pro-Trump events in November and December of 2020, as well as January 6th. As you can see here, Stuart Rhodes himself urged the Friends of Stone to have people go to their state capitals if they cannot make it to Washington for the first Million MAGA March on November 14th. These Friends of Roger Stone had a significant presence at multiple pro-Trump events after the election, including in Washington on December the 12th. On that day, Stuart Rhodes called for Donald Trump to invoke martial law, promising bloodshed if he did not.
He needs to know from you that you are with him, that he does not do it now while he is commander-in-chief. We're going to have to do it ourselves later in a much more desperate, much more bloody war. Let's get it on now while he is still the commander-in-chief. Hoo-ah!
There it is.
That night, the Proud Boys engaged in violence on the
January
streets of
6 hearings
Washington
are brought
and
to you by
hurled
Junk Brand
aggressive
Headband.
insults at the police.
Yeah, the thing that came up for me a lot too when that guy was shouting to it was like, we thought that was nerdy when we were in the army. Like he's almost using like
Just
the
previous
tactics
night,
that drill sergeants use
co-host of
to indoctrinate
InfoWars issued an
people with
ominous
stuff.
warning at a rally alongside Roger Stone and Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio.
Who is an FBI informant the entire time. Which is hilarious. So there's a bunch to talk about in here, but I'm waiting for a little bit more.
The Florida Oath Keeper spoke directly with Roger Stone about security on January 5th and 6th. In fact, on January 6th, Stone was guarded by 2 Oath Keepers who have since been criminally indicted for seditious conspiracy. One of them later pleaded guilty, and according to the Department of Justice, admitted that the Oath Keepers were ready to use, quote, lethal force if necessary against anyone who tried to remove President Trump from the White House, including the National Guard. As we've seen, the Proud Boys were also part of the Friends of Stone network. Stone's ties to the Proud Boys go back many years. He's even taken their so-called fraternity creed required for the first level of initiation to the group.
Hi, I'm Roger Stone. I'm a Western chauvinist. I refuse to apologize for defeating modern law. Thank you, Roger.
Kelly Sorrell,
So-
a lawyer who assists the Oath Keepers and a volunteer lawyer for the Trump campaign, explained to the committee how Roger Stone and
While this
other
is playing,
figures brought extremists
I see
different stripes and views
somebody in
together.
our chat, YouTube comment identifying with reformed white supremacists fucked up but true. They once did terrible things that they thought were noble, and now they see the reality that they were not the good guys.
Mr. Stone, Mr. Jones, and Mr. Ali Alexander. Is that correct?
I do not want to conflate moral injury and the healing process of moral injury for doing things while in service, or like even as police officers that have realized what they've done. I don't want to conflate that and draw an equivalent to that with white supremacists that are given a platform as big as this to downplay what the militias and the intent of those militias specifically was. I don't see this as them seeing that they now understand they aren't the good guys.
Let me note now
This
that our
is
investigation continues on
this
these
is
critical issues.
saving
We've
their
only shown
asses.
a
I don't
small
see them doing
fraction of what
work
we found.
or actually talking about the dangers of the extremism that they were involved in. They're not talking about that. They are rehabilitating their image. Oh, I'm just an average American family guy. I got swept up in something. Trump did it. Trump motivated me into this, right? There is nothing there that is apologetic for the beliefs that motivated them into that in the first place. Whereas veterans, ourselves included, many of us here right now, and the few that are in chat with us, suffer from moral injury as due to the actions we took while we were employed, due to the poverty draft, due to the rhetoric of how the state uses us, and the government influence on putting us in a position without us understanding. There is two very different things. I think there is room for white supremacists being rehabilitated, or like showing remorse, having moral injury, and doing the work to like rehabilitate and do good things with the remainders of their lives. This is not them being rehabilitated, right? This is their public image being rehabilitated.
President likes the crazies.
Yeah, they smacked to me of the kids that got caught doing something wrong, and now they're sad. If this had gone the way they wanted it to, they would not feel this way. You know, this is due to their punishment, and it's really telling to me that they're mostly talking about Trump. It's as if, you know, maybe they're being offered something as far as a deal to further testimony. That's just me alleging things, but it doesn't seem like an honest account of their radicalization or their participation.
We're presented with an opportunity to travel somewhere.
On January 2nd, Ms. Pearson's concerns
I'm going to
about
keep making
potential
comments about these
rally
ads.
had grown serious enough
We should charge
that
them.
She reached out to Mr. Meadows directly.
Someone made a really good observation, which is there are a bunch of
Would you mind giving me a call regarding this January 6th event?
representatives. I mean, in particular, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and members of the administration who have asked for pardons. And everyone's has been kind of like, what is that? What? Like, First off,
Here's what Ms.
you
Pearson
don't
said
ask for
after the
pardons
conversation.
preemptively because that's kind of like,
So what specifically
right.
did you tell him though about other?
like you can't ask for a pardon for
other
like, hey, I'm
events?
going to kill my
So there
wife
were
later
a
this
bunch
month.
of
Can you
entities
pardon me?
coming in.
Like that's not really a
Some were very suspect,
good angle.
but they're
But
going to
also,
be on
so like a
other-
lot of people
on
were
other
making fun of
stages,
it, but
some on other
someone
days.
pointed out that the
A
real
very,
point of
very
asking for
brief
pardons
overview,
is to
of what was
communicate
actually
indirectly with
happening,
people who are giving
and why I raised
testimony
the red flag.
and tell them that like,
And when you
if
told him
we
that people
regain the
were
White
very
House, I will
suspect,
pardon all of
what-
you.
what did-
Keep your
did you
mouth
tell him
shut.
what you meant by that?
That's the
Or what
clear
did you convey to
implication of
him about
asking
what
for
your,
pardons. Like you have this
the
this
problems with
stage
these
thing where
folks?
it's like, I'm going to ask for a pardon, and the other
I
person's like,
texted
I will
him
give
some
you
of
a
my
pardon,
concerns,
even though I'm not in
but I
office.
did
That's
briefly
just
go
there to
over
let
some
people know we're
concerns
gonna
that I
we're gonna
had
hook you up in the
raised
back
to
end,
everybody
right? We're gonna take
with
care of
Alex
you.
Jones or Ali Alexander and some of the rhetoric that they were doing.
I think if we would like Zach,
They had already caused trouble at other capitals.
yeah, this is JP. We can go to about 2 hours 45 minutes, and we're gonna hear some American exceptionalism, and then we can go ahead and wrap this up.
2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah,
Country
hey,
now.
right after this
American
person.
democracy, Mr. Chairman, is a precious inheritance, something
Is
rare
it?
in the history of the world and even on earth today. Constitutional democracy is the silver frame, as Lincoln put it, upon which the golden apple of freedom rests. We need to defend both our democracy and our freedom with everything we have and declare that this American card, the road to authoritarianism,
It's really
and it is
specific. and
Abraham
weird.
Lincoln's party, no less.
Democracy is the
Political
milkshake
scientists
upon
tell
which
us
the
that
pink Tamagotchi of
authoritarian
freedom.
parties have two essential features in common.
My democracy
around the world.
milkshake brings all the militias to the yard, and they're like,
They embrace political violence as legitimate.
It's kind of a
And the
toupee.
problem of incitement to political
find out.
violence has only grown more serious in the internet age, as we have just heard. But this is not the problem of one party. It is the problem of the whole country now. American democracy, Mr. Chairman, is a precious inheritance, something rare in the history of the world and even on earth today. Constitutional democracy is the silver frame, as Lincoln put it, upon which the golden apple of freedom rests. We need to defend both our democracy and our freedom with everything we have and declare that this American carnage ends here and now. In a world of resurgent authoritarianism and racism and anti-Semitism, let's
Have
all
I finally
hang
lost my
tough
mind? Didn't he just
for
say that
American
2 seconds ago?
democracy.
Did he
Thank
just
you,
repeat
Mr.
himself?
Chairman.
Or did we rewind on accident?
I think so. No, I think he
Gentleman
did.
yields back.
Thought of mine, I thought you were calling me out for the appropriation of the great Kali song.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At one of our first hearings, Chairman Thompson explained that the members of this committee do not spend much time talking about ourselves.
Yeah,
Rather,
get
we
the
would let
vomit
the
bag
evidence play
ready.
the leading role. And the chairman was right, because this isn't about promoting ourselves as individuals. It's about protecting the country we love.
But allow me
It's
to
about
promote
preserving
myself.
what actually makes America great: the rule of law, free and fair elections, and the peaceful transfer of power from one elected leader to the next. But if I may say a word about myself and why I'm proud to serve on this committee. I'm the only member of this committee who was not blessed to be born an American. I was born in Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and my family and I fled a communist
Yes,
government and were rescued by the
the
U.S.
Vietnam
Navy
War, a
and were
perfect
given
example of
sanctuary in
American democracy, always
My
coming up with the right answers and being on
patriotism
the
is
side of
rooted
good as
in
long
my
as you obey the
gratitude
rules.
for America's
Good,
grace and
good example of that.
Hold
I
on,
love
Zach, you got to back it up because she just doesn't stop.
On January 6th,
You
4
have to
decades
restrain
after
yourself
my
for a
family fled a place where political power.
What's that?
You got to have to back it up a little bit because you talked over the part where she's talking about the Navy rescuing her family. Like, really
Yeah,
good.
that's my bad. I like to run my mouth a lot. Yeah.
No, she says so many things that are make you want to react. It's no worries at all. But yeah, let's see if we can hear the rest of it.
Is everybody else over here like constructing their soapbox that we're all going to rant on?
100%.
Like,
They've already-
I am building mine right now.
Oh, you're building yours? Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
You're not on stable ground here, but I mean, I'm not gonna take a dump on someone's personal journey, but also like, it's a weird keystone.
Weird flex.
Sanctuary in America. My patriotism is rooted in my gratitude for America's grace and generosity. I love this country. On January 6th, 4 decades after my family fled a place where political power was seized through violence, I was in the United States Capitol. fleeing my fellow Americans.
Which, by the way, is
Members
another
of the
country
angry
where
mob had been lied to by a president
political power
and
was seized
other
through
powerful
violence,
people who
as
tried
is
to
the case
convince
in
them
most
without evidence
countries.
that the election had been stolen from them. Some of them then tried to use physical violence to overturn the outcome of a free and fair election. Our committee's overriding objective is to fight fiction with facts, to create a full account for the American people and for the historical record, to tell the truth of what happened and why it happened, to make recommendations so it never happens again, to defend our democracy. To me, there's nothing more patriotic than that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And with that bit of
Yields
honor,
back.
you can cut it.
Without
You
objection,
can
the
go back
chair
to
recognizes the
it.
gentlewoman.
What was that?
I said you can cut it. You can cut it there. They're just going to go back to Liz Cheney from that point, and she's going to give closing remarks. So I think what's really interesting about that last person's comments about patriotism and whatnot, and what links them through American exceptionalism to the people that are testifying today, those people that stormed the Capitol thought they were participating in this patriotic 1776 event. And although they're on perhaps opposite sides from that person that just spoke, she is exhibiting the exact same sickness of American exceptionalism, where she's not acknowledging what really happened in Vietnam. She's not acknowledging what the reason we were even there, right? So I think it's just such an important point to point out how American exceptionalism can manifest and radicalize you, because we have one group of people who are denying what they did, or at least initially they're thinking they're doing this very patriotic act where they're protecting our democracy by having an insurrection. And then we have all these Congress people that are spewing all this propaganda from their side about golden apples and shit, all these references to colonialism and Christianity and all these things. And that's the real problem here, is what I'm getting at. And I'm just curious how that hit all of you having to listen to that.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. That this sort of, I mean, I hate to use the technical terms because then it sounds like we're getting too wonky, but the settler colonialist mindset, and we're here to create this even playing ground for businesses to compete with one another, and through the magic of free market capitalism, create the wonderful ideas which will improve all of our lives. And anybody who says anything different than that is probably a communist and should be purged. That is the connective tissue that is connected all fascist movements. That specifically, that is where all fascist movements start. That's where they get their initial buy-in from the larger public. It's always about anti-socialism, anti-communism. The Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers did not start getting big until BLM became big and people started talking more about socialism after the 2016 election. That's how they drew a ton of their members, because they always talk about it's the black-clad, jack-booted communists that are coming for your guns and your kids and your TV dinner, what have you. That's how it always starts. And then it becomes, well, this group of people is actually, they're as bad as them, or they're contributing to that idea. It expands, and that's how you get from people. That's how you get a situation where, and this is crazy but true, you have a bunch of these former Proud Boy and Oath Keeper Telegram chats that are now called protecting your children from critical race theory, right? That's how you get there. And if you don't properly explain your, everybody on these hearings, in order to avail themselves of the proper 1776 label, I'm a patriot, they always have to say well, it's really patriotic to do X and it's really patriotic to do Y, and I respect our flag and our soldiers, blah blah blah. No one's talking about how that is just a slightly earlier branch of the main the main fascist line, right? There's some democracy, but oh yes, I can unshare my screen. Anyway, I don't want to go off too much on that, but yeah, that's the American exceptionalism is where all this is rooted, and you can only take Democrats so seriously when they agree with 90% of the conclusions of so-called Western chauvinists. You're still a Western chauvinist if you're we need to take over this other country and lead them around like they're children because they're just not smart enough for democracy yet. Or like they don't know how to deal with government corruption because they're like these same ideas underpin a lot of American foreign policy, which is also the propaganda base for this too, because a big part of fascism is putting everybody in the position to be like an action hero. And like the real priming for that did not come from the Proud Boys. The real priming for that came from, 30 years of like really, really rad action movies and 15 or 20 years of real men are in Afghanistan and Iraq. And that's how you get to that sort of like machismo. Anyhow, I'm going to end it there for my perspective because there's just too many things for me to go off about. But if anybody gets it, if people out there listening and everybody here hasn't read it, really quick read that's excellent for organizing a lot of these things in your mind is Fascism by Umberto Eco. It's an essay right in 1995 about growing up in Italy when Mussolini came to power and talking about how like fascism, how it evolves and how it looks and how it adapts, but what some of the key tenets of it are. And it's like you take toxic masculinity, you put it on the stove, you boil it down to a fine syrup, and then you just inject that straight into the veins. And that's largely what it is. Check.
You got anything, Shiloh? Are you still collecting your thoughts?
Yeah, just kind of riffing off what Ollie said, and thanks Zach too. Like that was clear, and I'm gonna read, read what you talked about, mentioned there. Just in like reflecting on what the Senator Murphy said, and just overall like the word veteran, like the actual term veteran was only used once by Congress in this entire hearing. Even though we know, like Ollie said, I think 86 former veterans were arrested in the insurrection. And so Congress only mentioned the word veteran once. And we didn't watch the clip, but if folks want to watch it, it was at the point when they're talking about this heroic police officer who was also a veteran. And so, yeah, it just like, they're not going to show up to the conversation in a genuine way. The conversation around extremism and within the military, extremism that showed up in the veterans that showed up on January 6th. That really stood out to me. I was ready to keep tabs, keep a tally of how many times they said veteran, and they only said it once. So that was really fascinating to me. I think just going on my first, like, what did I expect from this is just following that up. Like, we can't expect Congress to actually show up in a genuine way and trying to shed any light or unveil anything systemically that's a problem, because their livelihood, right, is based on this system of oppression that they're a part of. So why would they try to break it down in any way? That's just the overarching for me is can't really expect too much, have zero expectations of them to shed any light. We gotta go a little deeper on our own and in these conversations with each other. Check.
Thanks for that, Shiloh. Thank you. I have a lot of thoughts. So, like I mentioned, I was building a soapbox over here, and it wasn't directly at Miss Murphy's comments about colonialism and being Vietnam and being rescued by the Navy, but there is something to be said about the fact that commentary and that line of thinking, like Zach was saying about the American exceptionalism, or was that Ollie that was saying that? But the American exceptionalism that's done there, thank you, Ollie, that is being talked about there is actually buttressing the points of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and it's supporting their points in every single way. And the takeaway from the end of that hearing, Raskin talks and then Murphy talks, the takeaway from that is that, especially with how the conversation, how this portion of the hearing all went down, is that you guys just didn't do it right. Right? Like you're not doing your racism the right way. Right? Like, look, we're all the same racist people here because capitalism, but like you just didn't do it right on the day of. You got too violent when we're already on the same team. And it's all behind that American exceptionalism. The past deeds of America are right. You know, I asked the question at the start, like, what were our expectations to hear about, like, in this hearing, like, kind of retrospectively? What did we expect the day of to hear? You know, so I expected to hear conversations about I expected to hear conversations about this, right? I expected to hear conversations about Zip Tie Guy, who's in full battle rattle, who, when they invaded his home, or they made the arrest of him and his mother, this was his stash that was there, who had gone through extensive military training. I expected to hear conversations about Babbitt, Ashley Babbitt, the Air Force reservist who was shot and killed, breaking into the gallery of the house through the window, like going through a broken window with, if you watch the video, if you watch that happen, right, and you watch the video of that, she was backed up by an entire SWAT group of people that were in full-clad SWAT gear, none of which knew how to administer Stop the Bleed or do anything involving anything other than tactical execution of violent action. That is all they had. They didn't have any medical training. They didn't have any community defense training. They stood around and watched her bleed to death with no Stop the Bleed training at all. But they are in full battle rattle without an IFAC in sight or anything like that, right? We see this guy. This guy is a former, I believe, if I remember correctly, is a colonel, right? You can see his jump wings there, right? This guy was in videos. News reporters were following them around while this was going on, and he is issuing orders and trying to maintain OPSEC and talk about the strategic plan that they had trained him and his squad. And they're also the QAnon shaman was around this guy at the same time in some of the videos, and he's trying to marshal the QAnon shaman into military order. This guy is a military veteran who used his role and rank as an officer to try to impart that into the militia that was taking over the steps. You don't show up to a Trump rally, right, in this gear loadout with these weapon setups in full tactical gear like this without knowing what you're going to do beforehand. And that brings up a very important point, that this entire conversation, this entire committee that we're sitting here and discussing is focused on linking and portraying Trump as being the culprit. It is linking Trump to whipping up and creating a cult around him. It ignores the fact that these militia groups were forming in 2009-10 in a response to Obama being elected, with an uptick in 2012, right? In presentation of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys and RAM and these neo-Nazi fascist groups, right? These militias were forming as a response to the first Black president. It ignores, like they mentioned multiple times, the Oath Keeper, former Oath Keeper spokesperson talks about how he got involved as a result and was at the Bundy standoff, the initial Bundy standoff, right? And that happened in 2014 underneath President Obama. That was a racist response to land rights stuff and the pushback against the Black man's government, the Black president's government, right? And there was a standoff between federal law enforcement and what comes into militia groups who started traveling over state lines to go support a local farmer pushing back on government and society's presence. That turned into, 2 years later, turns into a hostage taking situation in Oregon where Clive Bundy's sons, Amos and I forget the other fuck's name, take over an Oregon federal wildlife preserve, right? Where one of the militia people gets killed by an FBI agent in a shootout, right? He fired 2 rounds, killing one of the militia people. So like that completely ignores the history. Oh, by the way, as soon as Trump came into office, after that second standoff in Oregon, Trump pardoned the Bundys of that Oregon standoff, right? Pardoned everybody. And guess what those turned out to be? Turned around. I remember like freaking the fuck out online about that standoff occurring and being like, there are militia people rolling into Oregon right now. There are calls being put out all across the internet for militia people to get their weapons and go help. This is where the standoff starts, and they're doing this, right? This is that occurred, and now Trump pardons them, and those same people turn around and are in the Oath Keepers doing a hostile takeover on January 6th. So they're in the Proud Boys. They're in these places where they are linked up with law enforcement agencies that are teaching them tactics, right? They are linked up with military veterans coming in. We talk about a lot of these the link between these militias and the extreme militias and veterans. But what we're failing to also talk about, and I think we are failing to talk about, what they didn't talk about in that committee at all, is that the people that are going in there from the military service are going from a place that thrives and uplifts and empowers a white supremacist culture and does nothing to address it inside of its ranks while they're in service, trains them into weapon wielding people, gives them the chance to go exact their Christo-fascist revenge in foreign lands, right? Gets their chance to be the oppressor, hone their skills on the battlefield, and then come home and not be treated, not be properly integrated back, and only find community within people that are doing the vet bro grift, like Black Rifle Powder or Black Rifle Coffee and these other places where the veteran exceptionalism, the glorification of the veteran, is the only way for many of these people to survive, right? Where they get lifted up on the pedestal, they have to buy into that glorification, and they have racist underpinnings and untreated traumas. So they get pulled into, there's a pipeline from bad faith actors that are pulling veterans into these places if they weren't already in them. Right. We see the militarization of our civilian population with the taking over the death's head of the Punisher's skull. We see murdered out vehicles being some of the biggest things, right? You think about motorcycles, one of the biggest styling points of motorcycle, if you ride Harleys, is the murdered out flat matte black motorcycle. Same with how many SUVs and pickup trucks do you walk by, Ford F-250 diesel super heavy or whatever they are, that are all murdered out like that. And they are preparing for the war that they fought in Afghanistan and Iraq and deployed to, that they were promised that they didn't get to go completely do because it's past their years. And now they come back and they're afraid and untreated and brought into that pipeline. And that racism is underpinning it all. That sexism is underpinning it all. That male machismo, that misogyny is underpinning it all. The homophobia, the fear, right? How we socialize our children growing up, the allowance of military recruiters to target kids as young as 8, the glorification in the process of the military owning our entertainment system and being able to have rights over rewriting script to make sure the military is shown in good faith. These things all coalesce into what we have now of January 6th people sitting in a committee in an international platform, the highest committee, like legislative process, and getting to downplay the underpinnings of what they believe in order to score political points to go, oh, Trump's the reason. It's Trump. No, it's America. Trump is the byproduct, right? Trump is just the loudest voice that they were able to mobilize behind, and he has the money to take that leadership position. That had nothing to do. Trump didn't stir up those underpinnings, right? Like Trump didn't create the racism that got him elected. He had already been involved in and had identified his base while he was in running his campaign, and he played to that base, and that base is still supporting them. You know what they're doing now? They are Proud Boys are focusing on school boards. Proud Boys are focusing on different places that at local level politics, and not looking at trying to do a hostile takeover of the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court already just ruled in every single way they want to, right? They have learned how to co-opt the spaces of our communities, and they are now leveraging their hate and anger and threat of violence in local issues when it comes to our children. And nobody's showing up to I shouldn't say nobody. There is not a concerted effort to push back on their presence at school boards, where they are running out parents of children, where they are putting into practice laws and policies that are burning books and refusing to teach racism and the genocidal history of America. We are seeing that they are getting every single wish they want with the pushback on, or the stripping of Native American sovereignty rights, Roe v. Wade's decision. They're already talking about bounty hunting parties for when Texas reviews Lawrence v. Texas. Obergefell is under target. They're targeting voting rights and legislation involving that, right? This is all part of the plan that's been around in extremist circles for a long time, and they learned their lesson about doing a violent overthrow because they had no clue what they were going to do there. But they are still getting their way in the policies that are being enacted, and they're still getting their way on at the local school level in our communities, and we live in fear every day. On top of that, it is further radicalizing. We are also in a post ideology violent state also, right? We have shootings currently, right? If you look at Buffalo shooting, Uvalde shooting, Highland Park, right? The one just happened, 2 days ago? Greenfield, Indiana, Greenfield Mall, Indiana shooting. There was just literally a shooting a couple days ago where the shooter turns and says, posts on 4chan, "My name is Jonathan, and today's a good day to die," while posting pictures of him in gear that is equivalent to what the zip tie guy has. He has his 2 weapon systems and a full plate carrier with his ammunition, and he goes into a mall and he opens fire. Right? We have these problems, and these people are just at a nihilistic point that they are beyond just identifying with the neo-Nazi or the white supremacist anti-Semitic talking points and identifying as Nazis. We're beyond that. We are looking at people that are going, I'm doing violence for the sake of violence because it's accelerating the fall of capitalism, because it's pushing back on this, where they are just purely nihilistically opening up violence, and that's a byproduct, a separate, even though that's rooted in racism, rooted in anti-Semitism, rooted in white supremacy, it is still neighboring. It's still in the same vein as these militia groups, and there's so much overlap occurring inside of that. So yeah, this none of that was discussed here. We didn't discuss we are discussing veterans, but the committee didn't talk about the role that veterans have, and military glorification, and all of this in creating a society based on violence that is enacting that violence on a daily basis, right? That's the times we live under. And what we did was we threw a chance for this platform to rehabilitate the image of 2 white supremacists and the militia group they were associated with, without any actual extremist researchers, law enforcement, or people that are doing the intervention systems to actually talk about how they were radicalized long before Trump. And that's a major issue. And like, we have to start doing de-radicalization work. We need to talk about the role of extremism in digital gaming adjacent spaces, in digital platforms. We need to talk about the co-optation of the internet for further militarizing and radicalizing our youth and our adults into a world where violence is acceptable. And we have to talk about that and actually start doing work around that. There's my soapbox. Sorry, that went long. I mean, I had tons of bullet points to talk about from the long video, but none of that's talked about, and I don't think like anything coming out of the January 6th committee hearings is going to actually address the underlying issues of how Trump came into office and how DeSantis is possibly going to be the next president with doing even worse things than Trump. Right? Like, we're not talking about how Dr. Oz is running on a straight racism ticket here in PA. We're not talking about the senators and the senators and governors and representatives that are running campaigns actively talking and in support of arming, like the AR-15 weapon platform, and how they're leaning so hard into American patriotism and military glorification. Like, we're not talking about any of that. And it's a major issue society-wise, not talking about us as veterans against the war, about face or Veterans for Peace. We've identified this. We've lived it. We were in service with these people, right? And we knew what they were going to do when they came out in a lot of situations, right? Like MST directly relates to this, military sexual trauma, the history of military sexual trauma in the military, and the pervasiveness of it and the failure to address it properly. Is the same perpetrators of that are coming home and going into these militia groups. All of this is connected, and we need to start fucking doing something about it and identifying it. I'm done talking now. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I think, too, that it's really important to note, related to what you were sharing, that one of the things that makes these groups attractive, and by these groups I mean the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, makes them attractive to veterans, is it's a space where you will continue to be put up on that pedestal as a veteran, and they'll give you that military exceptionalism that you may or may not be craving. And the reason for that is because they want to have you in the group so that they can say there's veterans in this group, but they want your training, and that's something that the Oath Keeper, I'll keep referring to him as an Oath Keeper rather than by his name that I can't remember, to unrehabilitate him a little bit. He shares a little bit about how they do spend a lot of time training with military veterans and former police officers. So, just like Chris is sharing, this is very concerning to us at About Face, that, we acknowledge the radicalization process that goes on in the military, and we try to help our veterans heal that we can reach when they come to us from that. But then, it's very concerning to us to see how easy it is for some of these groups to prey upon veterans, and about how bad that this eventually, and you can't even necessarily say that these are people preying on veterans. The Oath Keepers was started by a veteran. We're preying on our own. And then also, I thought another important point too that you brought up, Chris, was how that person's comments, that senator from Florida, whose name I also keep forgetting, how their comments buttressed the talking points of the Proud Boys. And I think that the most obvious indication of that is how they have to say communist when they're referring to the country that they were saved from. They could have chosen any number of words, but that word communist, and I think Zach brought this up too, is another link between these two people's ideologies, where they are going to use that as their boogeyman, even though they're allegedly on opposite sides of things. That's my soapbox. And how about you, Shiloh? Do you have any closing thoughts before we bring it home?
No, I mean, just backing up what all of y'all said, and just the closing comment of sometimes the most clear example of American and veteran exceptionalism is not actually talking about American veteran and exceptionalism. So the less we talk about it, the more rampant it is. So let's just keep peeling back the layers and having those conversations with one another, and questioning, and being critical about how it shows up for ourselves and how it shows up in our communities and in the spaces that we're in.
You're muted, Al.
I can never repeat the things I just said. It's gone forever now. Anyway, I was just thanking you, Shiloh, you, Chris, and Zach, who had to drop off a little bit early, and also to our wonderful tech support person anonymously there in the background. And thank you to all of you that watched. This was our first go at doing a Vets React video. I somewhat humbly apologize for the tech issues. We'll do better next time. We did have some more of the video we wanted to watch, but I think that y'all, the viewers, got the points we were trying to make here. And look out for more of this. We have Drop the Mic Mondays. We're going to do more of these Vets React, and we really want to be in conversation with you and in community with you about not only these issues, but the veterans in your lives. Because, you know, when I go out into the world, often I get approached by people who are like, you know, my brother's a veteran, my sister, whatever, what have you. And you know, this is a chance for us all to be in community and to heal together. And with that, I will let you all go about your day. Thank you very much for joining us. We are About Face. If you are a veteran or an interested ally, you can find us at aboutfaceveterans.org or at any of the typical social medias, which you may be watching us on now. And you can find us there at Vets About Face, at Vets plural About Face. And have a great day. Thank you.
Peace, love, and rage.
Bye, y'all.